state-of-the-art 1996.
Alrighty. Thanks for y'all's patience. Welcome to this regularly scheduled monthly meeting of the Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review. Staff will introduce each item, followed by the applicant's presentation, which should not exceed 10 minutes. The chair will then ask for questions from the public, followed by questions from the BAR. After questions are closed, the chair will ask for comments from the public. For each application, members of the public are allowed 3 minutes to ask questions and 3 minutes to offer comments. Speakers shall identify themselves and provide their address. I'd like to ask everybody to speak from the podium. Comments should be limited to the BAR's purview, that is, regarding only the exterior aspects of a project. Following the BAR's discussion and prior to taking action, the applicant will have up to 3 minutes to respond. Didn't get a chance, some of us talked a little bit, there's a pre-meeting discussion about the Virginia 250 grant request. I'm gonna move that to other business towards the end of the agenda. So we'll start our regular meeting. Review council's charge to the BAR. Jeff, is that something you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, give me a second. I am having some difficulty here.
All right, while you're working on that, I'm going to go ahead and ask if there are any matters from the public not on the agenda or on the consent agenda. The only item on the consent agenda is the meeting minutes from September of this year.
There are 3 virtual attendees. If any of you would like to speak, click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar, or you can press *9 if you're joining us via telephone. Chair, I see no hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, are you ready? All right, then we'll go ahead and ask if, does anybody have any comments on the consent agenda? I hear a motion to pass the consent
Move to
agenda.
approve as submitted.
You hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the consent agenda passes.
Okay. No. Hang on a sec.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me give you a little more time. We can talk about this Virginia 250 grant request.
Yeah, Kate, can you bring them up to speed on that, and I'll see if I can get this to cooperate with me.
Would you like me to elaborate? So for the Virginia 250 grant is through the Department of Historic Resources. This is a preservation fund, and the city of Charlottesville would like to apply specifically through Parks and Rec to undertake the long-term plan and rehabilitation management of our downtown mall. And so because we're applying for the grant, we would love the VAR support for this historic resource to plan for its long-term maintenance.
So this is a letter, VAR supporting primarily a Parks and Rec request for grant funding towards an initial phase of that tree management plan.
Do we know how much they're requesting?
Yes.
Are you gonna tell us?
It's a minimum is a 1/3 match
Right.
that they would like. And so we're going for a 50% match, about 1.3 million.
Okay, very good. Would y'all like me to read the letter? It wasn't circulated ahead of the meeting, so, all All right, this is addressed to Caitlin Sylvester, Grant Coordinator with Virginia DHR. Dear Ms. Sylvester, at its monthly meeting on October 15th, 2024, the Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review reviewed the City of Charlottesville's pending grant request for the Downtown Mall Preservation and Rehabilitation Project. Charged by City Council to administer the provisions of Charlottesville's Historic Preservation Ordinance, the BAR's purview includes the mall. Therefore, by unanimous consent, the BAR enthusiastically supports the proposed work and urges the Virginia Department of Historic Resources to provide the requested funds. As noted in the Statement of Significance in the National Register nomination, the mall manifests Halpern's utilization of a simple palette of materials and features based in part on local precedents to create a series of interconnected spaces that act as a stage for public life. And the mall is an outstanding example of Lawrence Halpern and Associates urban landscapes and the only extant work by the firm in Virginia. Those statements are all the more important as we approach the 50th anniversary of the mall, while also preparing for the events associated with the Virginia 250, with both celebrations expected to draw additional visitors to Charlottesville. The trees and fountains are character-defining features of our downtown living room, so it is imperative that they be appropriately maintained and, where necessary, properly rehabilitated. If you have any questions, please contact me. Thank you for considering Charlottesville's grant request. Sincerely, I would sign on behalf of the City of Charlottesville Board of Architectural Review. Happy to pass this around. If you want to maybe take a look at it and then vote at the end, or if y'all want to vote now, what's the feeling?
I can vote. I'm happy to vote.
Robert and I already saw it.
Already saw it.
Let's do it. I think by consensus, so you can, you know, everyone supports, yes.
Okay. Do I hear a motion of support?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
All right. I'll call the vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. It does pass unanimously. Thank y'all for drafting that for us.
All right, so,
All right, Jeff.
thank you. Yeah, and it's an interesting opportunity, this grant request. We'll see. It is for the 250th anniversary of the United States, so there are grant funds allocated to historic sites, not necessarily associated with the colonial America and the Revolution, and the mall being on, but they do want to provide funds for National Register districts and sites, and certainly the mall falls into that. So we'll see what happens. I just made a note that charge at the top was actually a note to myself to remember to just tell you, but I do want to, it's, you know, when we're on Channel 10, it's a good opportunity to inform. But, you know, the Board of Architectural Review, you all are not a committee. The city has lots of committees, and lots of committees that meet and plan and do things, but you all are one of the big four, as the city refers to it: the City Council, Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Board of Architectural Review. And you all are created by ordinance, and you are appointed by council, and what you do in reviewing possibly approving a COA, it essentially becomes an enforceable item. Zoning can enforce the conditions of an approved COA. So I think there's just some confusion sometimes that the BAR is just a group interested in historic stuff and makes, you know, like to make suggestions to people, but so everyone's very clear, you are an appointed body. Second, your responsibility is to implement the design guidelines and to interpret them reviewing projects. And per the ordinance, the guidelines are what you all develop and recommend to council. Only by council adopting them do they become official. So, you know, we had some things that are where we've interpreted and applied it as policy, but the guidelines themselves, so for example, tonight, when you possibly make a recommendation to council to update the cafe spaces, your recommendation doesn't make it so. It's only after I take it to city council and they agree to it. The other thing that comes up a lot and people don't understand is that every action for the BAR is appealable to city council. Someone can even appeal an approval, and we've had that happen where neighboring property owners didn't like a project, so they appealed to council for various reasons. It's very rare. I think I've dealt with 5 or 6 in my almost 8 years here. But even I feel sometimes even planning commission and council, people don't realize that BAR is not some autonomous group that is doing what it thinks is what to do. So so just when things come to the BAR and you decide something, councils can change that if it's appealed within 10 days. The other thing to be clear about is, and I mentioned it in there, is you all are not a zoning interpretive body. We have the project, and Mr. Schaefer's here tonight, 1609 Gordon Avenue, which I'm going to just formally withdraw from the agenda. But I still encourage you to have a conversation with the applicant. We need to resolve a couple zoning questions that I think it's best we resolve those before you all are reviewing this formally. But if, for example, you approved a COA and then it went in for a building permit and the zoning says this can't happen, someone can't say, well, the BAR approved it. So while you all have that, you have some authority under the code and through the COA, yet the ordinance is always capping that. You don't, by an action, intentional or inadvertently alter zoning. You don't supersede it. So, and I think I just want to make that clear because, I mean, if I think there's something that's questionable or if you all have some concern about how the zoning ordinance goes, we can look into that, but it's not, I even brought it with me tonight. You all are not, you're not responsible to memorize this and question and clarify everything. Now, I have to work with my colleagues internally to figure out how to work through the new ordinance, and we're finding some problems and issues with it. But so there, I just want to be clear with everybody out there what the BAR's role is, and that you're subordinate to city council, and they're the boss. So any questions about that? All right, the first item tonight is 1301 Workman Street, I believe. And it is, you all reviewed a COA for this, it's a new apartment.
Hey Jeff, before you get started, I just want to
Yes.
disclose
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
I actually have hired Design Develop to do a conceptual study for an addition to my house. So I think just for optics, I'm going to turn the chair over to Mr. Timmerman and abstain, but happy to listen in.
All right. So this is a COA request, 1301 Workman Street. It is within the Workman Street ADC district. This is adjacent to the Wertbacher House, which is has a couple of construction dates associated with it, but certainly early 1800s. You reviewed this project last year and then approved in 2022, and then approved the COA in 2023. The applicant is coming tonight to, and I flipped through it when Kevin speaks, making a couple of changes to the project. The primary being using or selecting an alternate brick and mortar. I think that's the key thing I want you all to focus on. There's a couple other items that are somewhat cosmetic that I'm not too concerned about. on, for example, in the east and west, on the side elevations where there are like recessed stair walls, those and the balcony walls will have a painted trim instead of the brick. Sliding doors are being reduced from 6 foot to 5 foot. And on the back wall, the north elevation, the entire wall will be painted cement panels in lieu of brick, and some changes to the retaining wall and the railings. So I didn't have any issues with any of those. I would have been comfortable, even those are the type of things that occur as your value engineering and typically work with the applicant on. But the masonry was an important feature, and it was an important part of the discussion that you all had as the project was being developed. So that's why I'm bringing it forward to you. And I'll let Kevin explain what he needs. And I'll flip as you tell me to.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeff. I appreciate that report and that introduction. My name is Kevin Schaefer. I am the Charlottesville Studio Director at Design Develop. And as Jeff mentioned, we are here to discuss just some developments and refinements of the material palette as this project has gone through the design development phase and moved through a value engineering project or process, excuse me. So on the next slide, you can see kind of the summary of the 4 revisions. I think Jeff correctly identified the more pertinent one is the revised brick selection, and I'll get into some of the choices or the decisions behind why we are presenting what we're presenting in just a moment. But the other areas of revision that you can see on this slide are the recessed areas, as Jeff mentioned, going to the Hardy panel for a couple of reasons. The first, obviously, being a cost-saving material, but also as we went through kind of a structural engineering process, the stair landings and the balcony connections through that brick veneer became very challenging and costly as well. So it's a move to simplify our balcony framing conditions, as well as still preserve the brick in the areas that it's visible, but where the building starts to recess and step back, bring down that Hardy panel in the sort of rectangular volume that sits atop the brick elements. The other revisions that Jeff mentioned are the changing of the sliding doors from 6 feet to 5 feet. That was primarily a building code consideration, as we consider the percentages of glazing that are allowed when we're adjacent to a property line or an existing structure on a lot. And just making sure that we were within those allowable percentages from a building code perspective. I don't think it fundamentally changes the overall form or feeling of the building to do so. And then I'll talk also about the guardrail substitution in just a moment. You can go to the next page. But overarchingly, what we wanted to do is, keep the form, the mass, the materiality the same, keep the overall concept intact, keep the relationship to the existing house intact, and overall, just the major driving points of the COA that has already been approved, keep all those together and cohesive and legible. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. So the brick being the topic that we debated the most internally. I have the 2 brick samples here. We felt good about the Windsor, the handmade brick.
Kevin, just so everyone's clear, that these are sample panels up against the Werdbacher House brick.
So thank you, Jeff. The previous selection, it was a handmade brick, and in the past almost 2 years since the Windsor, the Old Carolina Windsor selection made its way onto our BAR submission, obviously prices on construction materials have continued to increase, particularly around labor-intensive materials like handmade brick, and that just became a cost burden that nearly every general contractor who priced the project identified. And we also noted the board's sort of previous comments on the brick, which was Replication should not be desired. We shouldn't be trying to match exactly. And that there was some, flexibility in finding a complementary material. So complementary in material palette, complementary in its, kind of character. And so after reviewing several different brick options with Deb Brown from Allied, which is now Cheney, we selected and would like to propose the Pine Hall brick from Orktown, it's a Pine Hall brick. It's called Old Yorktown. It's a tumbled brick. It's coming from local, I believe it's a Roanoke plant, and so it is much less freight, much lower costs. It still has great character, being that it's tumbled. It has really nice color to it, and you can see from the samples here the difference between what was previously approved on my left here and what we're suggesting here on the right. But we think it's very complementary in color. It's not an exact match on the building. And if you flip through these images, you can see we took these brick panels to the site in a variety of different sunlights and shades, working to select the mortar, and working carefully to select brick that would look appropriate in shadow and in direct sun, and then in kind of indirect light as well. Sometimes when it was wet, and sometimes when it had dried out. And so we felt that the Pine Hall brick was a good substitution, and one that could make the project viable from a value engineering perspective. And so that is what's in front of you today. The other elements include, I included this slide just to show that this is with the revisions that we're proposing. And I think from the street, you would be hard pressed to tell a difference between what was previously approved and kind of what we're showing here. One of the things that was important that I do want to note, because it's a little bit counterintuitive to the value engineering exercise, is that the brick volumes needed to read as volumes. And so we are returning the brick a certain distance into those stairwells, which you can see kind of in this image here, that as that building starts to peel away from the rectangular form that's coming through it, we are utilizing a brick return there to kind of complete that corner and visually make that, that legible brick cube, if you will, still on this side.
About how far does that return back in?
In this instance, right here, and the one that's in front of us, it's 3'8". As the building, as the peel in kind of returns back to the rectangular form, it's 2 feet.
And that material is hardy plank?
And then it's a hardy panel. On the next slide, I think we can talk about our choices for the balcony. And we now have 2 installed examples of the custom steel railing, which on day one looks really, really great. We're a fan of the custom steel railing, which was previously approved. We have found that field painting, because of the requirements to field weld some of these elements, then we can't powder coat, we can't pre-prime it, and we end up field welding. And field welding every weld joint and every side of every bar, and every base plate and every bolt connection has just proved to be too challenging. And so from a maintenance perspective, we're proposing this kit of parts from Trex. It gives us very much the same look. It comes in 42-inch height, but it is very much a pre-finished kit of parts, which allows for the maintenance considerations to be assured. And we don't have the rust conditions at Virginia Ave even. The field painting, no matter what kind of paint we specify there, it seems to become an issue to just get it properly field painted. So we end up with rust where we don't really want rust streaks. And so that was the choice here. Obviously there's a cost savings too, but there's also a maintenance consideration and a longevity consideration. Next slide.
Just be clear on something. Again, when you see it big, so that where the beam at the top image had that shadow line, now it's just a flat fascia trim. Okay.
So yeah, once again, just we wanted to keep the overall building concept, the overall building form, the materiality. The windows were important to continue to be a high quality, and we opted not to VE those, and so those are the remaining as what was previously approved. As is the immense amount of site work that's going into this to make this a little bit better place, and so the goal is always to be respectful and deferential to the Wert & Baker House, and provide this kind of density here that will help ensure that it has the maintenance behind it to last another couple hundred years. Any questions? I'm happy to answer them.
Are you finished?
I'm good. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Yep.
Appreciate the update. At this time, we'll ask for any questions from the public. Any questions from the VAR? I have one about the railing. It's hard to tell in the renderings whether it's outboard of the brick, or if it's inboard, or if it's the intention is for it to be flat. And then there's a little ambiguity as to, well, not so much there, but on that other rendering, it looked like the railing was actually proud of the brick. So I was wondering if you might elaborate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. The as Jeff noted previously, the custom steel railing had this C channel that was being welded. The banisters were being welded to that C channel and then face applied onto our deck framing to work with the Trex system. It now gets it actually just relies on the posts, so we won't be attaching through the brick at all. But you'll see we'll have posts that are in line with the brick and kind of tie into the last rim board of the joist framing down below, and that'll screw down through the deck boards, but it'll be in line with the brick face.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Anybody else? Questions from the VAR? Then we'll go back out to the public. Any comments from the public?
No indications online, so.
We'll open it up to the VAR then. Comments from the VAR.
I'll start. I think the brick choice is a good one. I mean, I think that you're not downgrading quite so much. I mean, that's still a very handsome tumbled brick. I think it's kind of hard to expect someone to use a hand mold brick on a project or enforce that. It seems like this is a really good substitute.
I agree with the brick. I don't really have any problem with it. I would say that I prefer the previous railing. I think it was a little bit more sophisticated and has a little bit more of a custom look that would, I think, certainly on this side that faces the historic building, it would be a plus, in the owners and the city's advantage. If the alternative is chosen, I might suggest pushing it back a little bit to give us a bit of a relief to it, so that there isn't a flush transition between the two. One of the things that always stands out with the Trex is the sort of I think with a kit of parts, you get these kind of like railings that very much look like a kit of parts, and it has a different feel, I think, than kind of a custom steel deck that you're originally proposing.
I mean, Sorry. I think everything you're proposing is perfectly within our guidelines and acceptable and looks good. Definitely a great choice in the brick. My only concern is the back facade. It just kind of seems sad to me to get rid of all that brick right there, but I'm not sure I'm going to make that hold up my vote. So I think it's I'm okay approving this.
No particular comment other than the fact I think that you've made a good effort to honor the original design, and I would be okay with approving your suggestions here, your changes here.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion. Having considered the standards set forth within the city code, including the ADC district design guidelines, I move to find that the proposed modifications to the approved design, reference COA number 220903, for the new construction at 1301 Wirtland Street, satisfy the BAR's criteria and are compatible with this property and other properties in the Wirtland Street ADC district, and the BAR approves the application as submitted.
Second.
All approved?
Aye.
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 Congratulations.
Thank you.
What do we have next?
Are you back up?
Yeah, all set.
Oh, I thought he was. I thought he said he was pulling it.
All right. All right, thanks. So this is 1609 Gordon Avenue. And as I mentioned earlier, this is, I removed this from the agenda as a formal item, but I encouraged the BAR to offer any comments they had about the design to the applicant. I think that would be helpful if there's anything you wanted to address. So to be clear,
He just said in the pre-meeting.
and I'll let Kevin discuss this, but the recently, well, the city adopted the new zoning ordinance last December, and it requires the screening of mechanical units, rooftop mechanical units. So there would need to be some sort of a knee wall or something addressing those units at the roof. And the other piece, and this is when you view the project from Gordon Avenue, which would be the top image, that hallway that separates the two sides of the building, there's a provision in the code about how entrances like this should be treated. In one review of it, it could require that be have a doorway, if you will, at that entrance and not an open hallway. So I've asked the zoning administrator to review that and give me a determination, work with Mr. Schaefer on how they are interpreting it so that he can respond accordingly. So as I said, I thought on one side you all could discuss this, maybe take action and have some caveat, but I think that would be, that leaves too much sort of dangling out there to be resolved later. So it's wisest to let, again, zoning will be having an internal discussion about this on Thursday, and they can advise Mr. Schaefer what the decision is, and he can respond accordingly, and then bring the presentation back with those two things resolved. So just a little background, you all did review this in earlier this year with a preliminary discussion. There's an existing building on the site, a 1960s apartment building that would be raised. It's not a contributing structure, so that it doesn't require BAR review. And I want to just make the opportunity here for you all, if you did have something, and certainly Kevin can present his slides and talk through it, but it really it's your pleasure on if you want to simply wait until this is ready for formal action or have some discussion on it. So leave that to you. And my point being is if you'd like Mr. Schaefer to review the slides, he can, or you can say we'll talk about this at a later month. That's your call.
Look at me. I mean,
Are you looking for some input? Would you like to give a presentation, or would you like to make some comments?
Seems like we're all here.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for facilitating the discussion, despite kind of the news that broke this morning. There may be an issue with zoning, and thank you. I'd rather, what do they say, fail fast. I'd rather know that earlier rather than later if there is an issue. I will say we have been through 2 site development review plans, and it hasn't become a comment yet. So it was news to me. It was exciting. I think the screening is obviously very easily solved and very clear in its language that there needs to be mechanical screening. We have a rendering in this package. I think the screening will actually be more visible than the mechanical units, but I don't think that it's like a battle we're going to win. So we'll put the screening on, and that's fine. We have made the following revisions since our preliminary hearing, all of which I think have made for a better, more cohesive, more legible project. The first being the removal of the commercial standing seam details that we were showing in our previous renderings and moving towards a more residential standing seam. The second being the elimination of the hardy panel, which definitely allows for a lot more control of our control joints, a lot more ability to place our control joints in the way we want to, as well as it's insulation on the outside of the wall. It's a robust building system, so we felt like that was a good move as well. We have previously we had kind of 2 main building materials, wall materials. We had a brick and we had the hardy panel, and in certain locations the brick appeared to be floating, particularly above the parking entrance. We have a balcony, a recessed balcony, and so we have introduced a third material, which is a hardy plank that helps eliminate that kind of odd floating brick condition. And then beyond that, it's just been the development of the details, the location of gutters and rainwater leaders, thanks to Jeff's encouragement, the development of the landscaping, the pedestrian access, the amenity space that we have, the required screening for the garage on the alley side. And so, those couple of site development reviews under our belt, plus the initial BAR hearing that we had earlier this spring, had us feeling like we were in a pretty good spot. So we'll continue to work with zoning and determine what the problem is. I'm not quite clear yet if it's just a door that is required to be on this facade, or what the entry requirements are. I can read the entry requirements and I'm still not clear on it, so. But we'll work through that with zoning. In the meantime, I think, thanks to Jeff's help, if there's further comments or questions that you have for us or suggestions that we should consider, we'd be all ears at this point. We do value the BAR's input and feedback that we get when we're here. Would you mind quickly scrolling
Sorry.
through just so that, and we can do this real quick. I do want to highlight the anticipated screening locations that we'll come back with because I don't believe we have seen that. These renderings do not show the screens. As you can see, the mechanical units on the roof and elevation. We did a little eye height test. We have the ability to locate the eye height, you'd have to be 30 feet tall to see the mechanical units from any location. Again, this is a little bit of a moot point. The zoning code requires screening, and it's not something we would fight. You can go through the next slide.
And I'll offer here, I know that lights coming out of parking garages have been something that comes up both with the BAR and the entrance corridor review. So I had asked Kevin, because they showed a metal screen on that, but the response, that it's a screen with planting on it. I think it's somewhat like the Cars Hill Garage
Yeah.
near the A school, yeah. So that satisfied me as far that it was something was physically going to be, it wasn't just a screen over the opening. And I'm not sure, or that's just part of the.
This was part of the site development review that I did include, just so that we weren't trying to be disingenuous with what we were showing between our current site plan and our BAR package.
So Kevin, is zoning asking you to enclose the entry space?
I have not been able to get in touch with zoning, so I don't know. I think Jeff raised his hand this morning, or I guess it was yesterday afternoon, and I came in and met with Kelsey Schlein at Shimp Engineering, and we looked through it. The standards for, and this is not a zoning, but I'll just give you my thought process. The standards, which is 210.13.3C, to qualify as a street-facing entry, building entrances must meet the following standards. They must be located on a street-facing ground-story facade. They must provide both ingress and egress pedestrian access to the ground story of the building. They must remain operable at all times. Access may be controlled. Must access an occupiable space. So I think we are checking all 4 of those boxes, but there's someone on this board who knows much more about the zoning code than I do, because he was involved with the writing of it.
It's the entry feature section that, where they talk about you're required to have an entry feature,
Mhm.
and then it has to meet certain standards, and those standards are strangely very particular.
Mhm.
And they have a certain amount of percentage of enclosure, a certain amount of percentage of, what's open, what's not. And they all say must, a covered, like a porch, it'll say, a covered porch with a front-facing entry. So there's some language in there that, again, it's vague, but probably does need to be defined.
Okay, we were considering this a covered enclosure, which didn't have any minimum depth or any minimum width. And then it had 50% enclosure max, which I think we were meeting all of those.
Well, okay.
Again,
We'll see what zoning says. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes down to the note here, my conversation with the zoning administrator at the end of the day. Does the entrance feature, this entry feature, require a closable door? Can it be defined as a forecourt, which I think would, allow then it to be serve as it is designed, and sort of that question about occupiable or habitable space and how defining that, where you walk in then to enter the individual apartments. So that's what they'll be discussing on Thursday and internally, and we'll have a decision on it. I mean, it's possible that they say, from a given perspective, as designed meets the code, but I don't have that.
Would you mind repeating the line that you were referring to in the zoning?
Yeah, this is 21013, which is entrances, and I was referencing 3C, which
Okay.
is,
Yeah, I circulated that in an email, I think, to y'all yesterday.
But he could repeat it.
Yeah, no problem. Just,
Before we get any more comments or reviews, anybody from the public want to comment? Yes? Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Genevieve Keller, President of Preservation Piedmont, and I didn't come intending to speak about this, but it did raise something to me that through the extended rezoning process came up several times. Preservation Piedmont was trying to kind of quietly follow that process through all of its aspects, meeting with NDS leadership, the consultants, city council, and we were each time assured that the code would not prevail over the guidance of the BAR, that when there was a conflict, the BAR would have priority. It seems that this might be changing a little bit. I personally and professionally don't necessarily have any thoughts about this, but I could see down the road where we would, so I think it's really important how this gets resolved, particularly with some of the big issues that could come up between the code and between either your existing guidelines or new guidelines. So I just want to raise that as an issue now, because we did have assurances at the highest levels through this process that preservation values would not be sacrificed to the code. I'm not saying that that's the case here, but I think it starts to be a precedent. And I know previously there was an issue when something was appealed to council before we had a form-based code, and one of the counselors was trying to apply form-based code to actually the historic features of a building to change the fenestration pattern. So down the road, this could have a lot of implications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else from the public? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Jean Hyatt. I was on the BAR many years ago, so I just know that my concern is that needs to be in a large, or any building, a nice entranceway that's welcoming and is significant to the building. And I'm not seeing that in this design, so I'm hoping that you can change that so it's much more formal and interesting. So that's all.
Anybody else?
Nobody
On the board.
online.
Okay. Well, obviously, I think you realize I'm the problem. So I apologize. That was, yeah, something that I questioned. But I questioned it because this open stair in the middle of the building, and I mentioned this at the last time you brought this in, it puts us in a little bit of a bind because 2 blocks to the north, we forced a project to get rid of their open stair that divided their building in half because it didn't fit the context. 2 blocks to the south, we gave you guys the opportunity to do that for a different context. This context is kind of right in the middle. And I do, I agree with Ms. Hyatt that the building is kind of lacking any sort of entrance. It's just kind of got this slot in the middle of it, which opens up into a parking garage at some point. So, I mean, we'll see what happens with the zoning code, but I do feel like that is something that's lacking in the design, that's making it less contextual for this residential neighborhood. I mean, I know we have apartment buildings nearby. It's a mixed neighborhood, but there's also, Montessori across the street, we gave a really hard time to when they tried to do a little addition. And there are still residences on this street, so it is, it's not exactly a completely student neighborhood context. Some minor comments. I appreciate the screening on the garages, although what you've labeled, it says Virginia creeper ivy. So I assume that means Virginia creeper or ivy. Virginia creeper will lose its leaves in the winter. Both that and ivy will stick to the brick and eat the ephes. So I don't know if there's just something else you can find for that. I don't know if that was just a placeholder you put in there. I'll defer to Breck on that. But I probably shouldn't put any plant material that's going to stick to the ephes. Let's see. Are the eave materials, is that just like fiber cement trim? It's looking like metal turning over the eaves, but is it supposed to be like a fiber cement trim detail?
Yes, and then Jeff actually encouraged us to provide some details. It's very in here, it can be in the next one. Yeah.
Okay. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, it's still the front facade it's still very monolithic. You're going for a contemporary look. I understand that. But with that monolithic and kind of plain look to it, I think you're, again, because you've just got an open slot right in the middle, I think it's lacking as far as context for the residential portion of the neighborhood. But I don't know if this came next week or next month when this comes back to us, and if you still have an open stair there and you don't have to do anything with the entryway, and if I'm the only person that has an issue with that, then you probably, I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in.
I wasn't here when this project was first presented, so I apologize for that. I think I like the massing of the project generally, and I don't know if I have a very strong opinion about the entrance way. I do think it is beneficial to the neighborhood generally to have such a significant break in the volume of the building, which is quite large. So really making it feel like two separate structures, I think, and turning the roof line is helpful. My main concern, and I would have voiced this, sorry if I had seen it earlier, but the ephes to me does not fit the context, in my opinion. And I know that we've okayed it in limited applications in the past, and especially in applications where it's further either away from public view. This would be one of the most prominent ones that we would have approved. I know the Virginia Avenue one we approved, but that's also on a quite a bit quieter street. This one, what concerns me is not only the ephes as a material, which feels pretty inexpensive, but it also is so bright, and that bright white inexpensive material in this residential neighborhood feels just wrong. And I wish there were a better alternative. I would not have recommended that if I were here in February.
What is the height of the HVAC units on the roof?
We have two different ones depending on the size of the unit. So if there's a 4-bedroom, then it's probably about 36 inches tall max, and but it probably includes some sound dampening feet that go with that. The other ones for the 2-bedroom units are smaller. Those are kind of mini split systems, and they're probably 24 to 30 inches.
And what is the proposed material for the screening?
Jeff, would you mind flipping just a few slides ahead? We employed a, yeah, here we go. That's helpful. We employed a, like a pre-finished aluminum screening is what we're thinking of. They have, you know, obviously screening products that are designed to go on roofs. It would be the same color as the metal roof. And I don't think it would be visible, particularly given the adjacent landscaping. So that's what we're thinking. And probably 42-inch high, though.
Okay.
Just to follow up on Coral's comments about certain details, I would love it if you came back with the brick you're proposing. If it is an EIFS, the color sample would be the best. It's really hard to tell on renders sometimes what the actual color is meant to be. You know, there's sunlight and reflection and everything that sometimes distorts that. So I think having physical samples of the two main, if not tertiary materials and product information on the screens would be great too, because not all of those decorative screens are the same. So that would be have some hard and fast information to grab onto. That would be very helpful, I think. And personally, if there's a way to, it's hard for me to tell where the windows are in line with the EIFS, how far back they are. That would maybe just a simple window detail. I'd understand the sort of thickness and how, you know, the materials return would help as well. Anybody else? That gives you something to go on.
I've just got some comments from our guidelines on the use of EIFS, and maybe we talked about this in January, but actually we didn't because it was already playing, so this is a change of material.
This is my fault, because I suggested the change, and I'm not sure if anyone else chimed in.
And I recall that, and we were supportive about it because of the joints, because of the feeling that EIFS would be able to, for this larger space, EIFS would succeed. Yeah, but anyway, materials and textures, and this applies to materials and textures, this applies to new construction. The use of EIFS is discouraged, but may be approved on items such as gables, where it cannot be seen or damaged. It requires careful design of the location of control joints, which is one of the discussion from our January meeting. With regard to the entrance, a couple of guidelines under windows and doors, the size and proportion or the ratio of height and width to window and door openings on new buildings' primary facades should be similar and compatible with those in the surrounding historic facades. The proportion of the upper floor, I won't read that because we're not talking about that. But with regard to the entrance, it is, I don't know how, I haven't driven up the street recently to compare, but another guideline, many of the entrances of Charlottesville's historic buildings have special features such as transoms, side lights, or decorative elements framing the openings. Consideration, and this is talking about new construction, should be given to incorporating such elements in new construction. Porches. Porches and other semi-public spaces are important in establishing layers or zones of intermediate spaces within the streetscape, and they are also encouraged. So. I'm not an architect, and I don't know what to suggest specifically about this entrance, but it's, you know, it probably suffers from the fact that there's not habitable living space behind it, that it's really, you know, leading to a utilitarian space like on-grade parking. I get that. But people are still going to be using that as they come up and down those upper floor stairs. So it is, I mean, it doesn't take away from the fact that it is the main entrance to the building, except for those who might be approaching, you know, in through the garage. So perhaps better minds on this board might be able to make some suggestions.
I'll make a suggestion. I'm wondering if it wouldn't help to de-emphasize the balconies on the second and third floor and kind of put a little more importance to the pedestrian level entrance at the, create more of a traditional porch. Doesn't have to be, I mean, I like the idea of having space between the two forms because it kind of scales it back down to the neighborhood. But I think that those overhanging balconies give it like immediately an apartment feel to me in a not positive way. And then maybe the door could be incorporated. I don't know the exact wording of the zoning, but if there's a little more emphasis on the ground plane rather than the second and third floor, the doors might be part of that.
I would say what the second story balcony would, it kind of provides an overhang, so you get some protection from the elements. So that's one reason it might have been programmed that way. But it certainly doesn't even come to the sidewalk out front. I mean, it's, for a large building, it's a small protrusion, small covering. So I wonder what you could do there, maybe observing what Roger has said.
Anyone else? I don't think we officially have to resolve anything here.
For Kevin, any questions?
Any other
Have we
questions?
sufficiently confused you?
No, the eaves back and forth, no one's touching the eaves in this location. It's on the second story, it's not a pedestrian level. It is on a gable end. It happens to be, pretty prominent in terms of building form. I certainly understand the color comment in our renderings, and I think we can address that color comment. I'd encourage you to drive down Virginia Ave and look at that project. It looks nice, and not because we did it, but just like with the guidance from the BAR, those are big, large areas of eaves that have really tight control joints that align with windows, and there's rationality and there's order behind those things, and it kind of works. And so, I think doesn't the church across the street is stucco as well. I think there is quite a bit of stucco on the street contextually, and so I don't think it's out of place from a material perspective. I think it's just maybe it's a color issue. I think it's, from my perspective, it's a lot more thoughtful and controllable than working within Hardy panel. And we're gonna take a 4x8 Hardy panel sheet, and we're gonna start at one end, and then you're gonna, as hard as we can try to align things, you'll see way more trim lines and joint lines and aluminum trim that doesn't line up, and when it doesn't line up, we'll all cringe. So that's my concern, and I'm not opposed to looking at other materials, but I felt like the direction that we were given last time was a good one. The staircase, we do utilize that staircase obviously to break down the building form into very much residential massing, and that's kind of deferential to our context as well. How can we take this building footprint that's immediately adjacent to us and not overpower it with a building form that could honestly be 2 more stories taller and even wider than we're showing to some degree. So, there's a shadow line, there's a big void, and that creates a breakdown in the building mass, which I think is a positive. So I do like the comment. And I think we'll continue to study it, so thank you.
Just for clarification, so you don't come back and bring something that, again, we have issues with. How many people would not vote for this because of the EFS? Is that a fair question to ask now?
Sure.
So you would say no? No. I mean, I
So we
support
may be
EFS
in the
for the reason
minority.
that the fiber cement panels, I mean, just as you said, you've got the joints are all over the place, and I don't think I've yet to see fiber cement done well in this town. It's always a little bit wonky. The joints and the metal flashings and everything are always kind of coming out in a weird way, even if it's a really expensive system.
Yeah, for me, it's more of a color issue.
Yeah, I think materially, I'm in support of it. And, yeah, I think some of these other materials you get into, they're more fussy and they tend to warp, or they tend to, there's more, just a more margin of error that happens. So at least the ephes is monolithic, you know, and if you choose a good quality one, to, you know, like a limestone quality to, you know, if you're using precedent of the church across the street or the other stucco structures on the street, seems appropriate to me.
Speaking of the street, the building next door to it, what is that material?
CMU.
Used to be pink. That's great.
I mean, I think we were in favor of Jeff's comments regarding the eaves in terms of its durability and its quality of construction. Certainly be something we would specify. So, thank you all for the feedback. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.
For the record, I like the balconies the way they are.
We don't have comments from the public, so.
Just gotta get half of us happy.
We're not taking comments right now from the public.
So just a couple takeaways for me. One is, you know, I viewed this as like an apartment building that has, you know, not as a single building. So as we get things that come in and you know, student residence type developments, I think, you know, go back to something Tim Moore often would say is, you know, in those preliminary discussions, sort of decide what are the key issues that are going to drive how you review a particular project. So, I mean, if this had been sort of as a traditional apartments like up at 1600 Grady Avenue or over on University Circle, or maybe viewed as a boarding house type of thing with a primary entrance. So we can think about those things as projects like that come in and say, all right, how are we going to treat this? And then you all sort of respond accordingly. The other thing is that the preliminary discussion, you know, was very positive, and you all offered a lot of input that then design develop responded to. So I don't want to ever say that those conversations obligate you to the opinion at that time, but we do, you know, the applicants are relying on that input. That's why we have the preliminary discussions. And so I'll go back, I can look through, well, I'll share those, and of course they're always available. Just sometimes we do provide information that then, you know, yeah, obviously if something's a mistake in hindsight, I don't have you know, we should point that out. But I just want to be careful when if in the preliminary review, realize that we're setting the course that the applicant is going to follow. So let's, you know, we tend sometimes to not get into the weeds, but maybe we need to a little bit. The other thing I just wanted to address, and Ms. Keller raised a good point. This is a new building, so in that application, zoning prevails. There are some conditions in the ordinance addressing buildings that are in a design control district, and I think the garage door down on Water Street's a perfect example of does zoning require, because they're doing something to that building, require that they then have the entire elevation has openings that meet the code. And there was actually some internal debate about that, about how the intent of the ordinance and then the actual language of the ordinance. So, Carl, I can't remember what because there's the rehabilitation of a building, but if there's a change of use of a building, there are some conditions in there. Yeah, and reading it, nothing's jumping out.
I thought it was just that if you add on to a building or you change it, you don't have to retroactively change what existed. So, like, I don't know, maybe the addition needs to follow the zoning code, but
Yeah.
the existing current piece that remains doesn't have to be upgraded, I think.
And so it's where, where there's a question about the zoning, I'm not a zoning official, so I can have an opinion, but it's, but I'm just offering that what Ms. Keller raised is a legitimate concern. There's a fine line, you know, obviously a new building's a new building, and rehabbing a historic building, you know, is very clear, but there's some gray area there that I don't know how to test it out. And and understandably so. I mean, we could sit there and talk about what ifs until the cows come home, and we have a lot going on just trying to apply this ordinance to what we're seeing. So, but I am concerned there is currently a request to evaluate height of buildings on the downtown, I think it's the DX zoning, which covers more or less from the railroad tracks to just north of Market Street. So, and then there's the provision that allowed the BAR to, the BAR can, relative to height, specific to those buildings abutting the mall. So that would be abutting the bricked mall. But then throughout that DX district, you also are reviewing things in there. So there's another provision that covers, you know, outside of those properties abutting the mall. In my response and discussions internally, and this has been happening in the last 2 weeks, as I've repeatedly said, BAR's decision is appealable. So if for whatever reason you all were reviewing a project and said, we would like that addition on the top of that building to step back 20 feet and cap it at X stories, if an applicant did not like that outcome, they could appeal that. So that tool exists as it's always existed. The second thing I've said, and you all will be hearing more about this in the coming months, but the BAR has approved some pretty tall buildings. I mean, there's an unfortunately unfinished one on the mall that's awfully tall that was approved by the BAR. So I've tried to tell applicants over and over again that, you know, one, you can appeal if you don't like the BAR's decision, but two, the BAR's not afraid of height. It's that transition from that historic face to when something new begins. But I am concerned that the effort is being made to say, well, the BAR can't tell us how tall a building should be. And as I said, ultimately it's council that decides if the BAR can tell someone how tall a building may or may not be. But that discussion is occurring, and I think one of the things I'm most concerned about on the height of buildings, and not just on the mall, but all over the city, is, you know, a 10, 12, 13-story building. I suggested we carefully weigh the expense for replacing the trees on the mall if we're going to build buildings that don't allow them to get any sun. I mean, it seems counterintuitive, but but Ms. Keller, I appreciate your comments, and I do think it's a question that's going to be raised. To what extent can the BAR, given the intent of the comprehensive plan to build bigger, taller buildings closer to the sidewalk, I think there's inherently going to be a collision that we have to resolve. And it can't be, well, we'll follow the guidelines and then council can review it. We need to, how do we adapt the guidelines in a way that, otherwise remove the ADC districts. I mean, if that's ultimately, if the intent is we don't want the BAR involved in this. So that's my 2 cents. Again, I thank Ms. Keller for raising the issue, and it's going to be discussed a lot. Yes?
do you want me to just, I've got the section open, I can read the three things that. So council actually made this change, right as they were approving the final zoning ordinance. So the BAR, conditions may require a reduction in height or massing consistent with the city's design guidelines and subject to the following limitations. Along the downtown mall, the BAR may limit story height to within 2 stories of the prevailing story height of the block. In all other areas subject to review, the BAR may reduce the allowed height by no more than 2 stories, and the BAR may require upper story step backs of up to 25 feet. So did you catch that? Okay. So those are our current restrictions that we're operating under.
Those are the things that we were following. We would have liked it to have expanded to a larger area, but we felt that focusing in on the downtown mall was the largest measure of success we were going to get in that local plan.
Let's.
And then the only other comment I was going to offer is, I'm still not sure what to do about EFS. It's like it's become my nightmare in 2023. The guidelines said no EFS.
5.2. Oh, shoot.
What,
It's kind of buried.
what's the alternative? Just be a true masonry stucco. But Hosea Mitchell, the chair of the Planning Commission, he deemed EFS an ignoble material. And because the Entrance Corridor Review Board's seen an awful lot of that.
Good quality material.
All right,
It really is. It's got a bad rep from the 1990s.
Yeah, I think that's something that I do remind folks of. We can't require quality installation. I mean, I've seen masonry that's terrible. You know, we love brick buildings, but you can't make a mason do a phenomenal job. So that's one of the issues with any product. All right, the next matter is this discussion about the cafe space design guidelines. I did want to mention that Kate we have to take a photograph of the BAR. You all are getting an award next week from the AIA chapter, and they asked us for a high-resolution photograph of the group.
Wow.
So I wrote it on my hand so I wouldn't forget. Yeah, and I will be out.
Did you bring our
to-
robes and
yeah.
wigs?
I'll be out tomorrow and the following week, so that's why I'm a little bit fuzzed out right now. Took my son and Sandy to the airport. We were up in Northern Virginia, got up at 4, go to take him to Dulles, and I just drove home, and now I gotta get up tomorrow, and I told Breck to make sure I get to the airport, because somehow I think I'm gonna go into work and just like a normal day, but thank you, Mr. Gassinger, for offering me a ride. But I won't be available, but, you know, certainly Kate's in the office if anybody has any questions about things coming up. So, anything else that we needed was on our list? Let me see if I can find,
So we'll do the picture after the meeting? Okay.
I'm just gonna get together, do the sorority pose and
After
click.
we've all had a big fight about these cafe spaces.
Hopefully there's no.
I'm kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke.
These look great.
I just want to load something on some of the images that in fact you all had even asked about, so that I have them ready to go. We can refer to them. And for the, Mr. Timmerman, are you yielding the chair to Mr. Zemer? Do we need feats of strength to determine who?
I will yield.
Thank you for your service, Mr. Timmerman. Appreciate it.
Anytime, Mr. Zeman.
Okay, so I found this. If you have questions about images, I can pull them up. So the matter before you next is not, it does require a formal action, if you will. but it is not it's not a COA, it's not, you all are not approving the revisions to the design guidelines. We already have guidelines, and these are just updating them. This is the result of the 2 work sessions we had about them. I know we still need to figure out how to best package them for publication. We'll figure that out. But what's before you tonight is to make a recommendation to City Council. My hope is that if you do make that recommendation, I can try to get on council's agenda for either November 18th or December 2nd. And I'm sure they will have questions, but the goal is to have these guidelines, in whatever form they ultimately end up at, in place by the beginning of the year, so that then we can work with each of the cafe space, folks that are leasing a cafe space, and there's no surprises. March 1st is when the leases are renewed, and what we're going to do is, how many did we, there was a lot more spaces than I realized, honestly, like 40-something?
42.
Yeah, and
The answer to everything.
so to establish a document that says, this is your COA. Moving forward, this is where, you know, what your furniture is, this is what your railing is, these are the things that you would like to have in there. So we're all on the same page and starting out from that.
Was that 42 on the mall, or that included the corner?
At the corner, yeah. And it's not necessarily 42 separate businesses, but those are the spaces that are available. So I did my best to capture the discussions that we've had. I know there's likely some. Great. I ran out of juice, Kate. Juice. Cut me, Megan. Let me try. I realized I took my charger home. Yay, okay. So, I hand it off to you, Mr. Zemer, to lead the charge. We can answer questions, we can make modifications if you guys want to adjust something. You also have, if you're just not ready to say yes, we bump this to the November BAR meeting.
All right, thank you. So just to kind of recap how we got to tonight, I guess at last month's meeting, we started a discussion on essentially revising the design guidelines pertaining to the exterior cafe spaces, primarily on the downtown mall, but we also realized that it does include a few spaces on the corner, in the corner district. And then it was a good conversation last month, and we realized we needed more time. So we scheduled and held a work session on October 1st at City Hall in the NDS conference room, wherein we continued the conversation and essentially came up with this chart spreadsheet. Thank you to Jeff and Kate for their hard work on putting this together. Very helpful, which basically summarizes kind of the different elements of the mall, cafe spaces, summarizes what the current 2012 guidelines say, and then kind of goes into our draft revisions. We tried our best to try and kind of keep in mind that we do not intend this to be overly onerous to the cafe leases, what's the right term? Users.
Spell check wouldn't let me do leases.
Recognizing that there's, a lot of folks that have invested money into what they have out there, and so this is not necessarily intended to be a huge financial burden. However, we want to make sure that the mall is a nice space, has quality things out there, and that also the intent is that this would be So the leases are renewed on March 1st of every year. And so that this would come into effect on March 1st, especially pertinent to new leaseholders. There are a lot of things that we are grandfathering in, again, trying not to be overly onerous, but the idea would be that sort of over time, these design guidelines would get implemented across all cafe spaces as businesses come and go. Is that a fair summary of how we got here? And so I believe all these recommended draft revisions were circulated and handed out to all of the current cafe leaseholders. So they were made aware of these proposed revisions and also presumably invited to come tonight. Don't see too many here, but that's okay. Before we invite the public to comment, I wanted to ask if anybody has any revisions or last minute changes they would like to discuss or recommend, or if everybody feels pretty good with what we.
So we should do that before public comment?
I think just, well, if there's anything right off the bat, yes, but we can also have comment afterwards.
I'd like just to add a little context to what you've already provided, just just to let the public know, and for the record, that this has been a conversation that's been ongoing for several years, and was a major component of the conversation of the Downtown Mall Committee, which brought together stakeholders from many different parts of the city, including business owners, people who work on the mall, citizens, people who live here. And it was pretty important, compelling conversation that really got to this essential truth, is that we are stewards of a pretty remarkable place, both as citizens of Charlottesville and here as a board. We have an incredible benefit of living near one of America's really truly remarkable urban landscapes, a designed landscape, and it was the outcome of some foresight and some commitments from the city to pay and for the design and construction of this space, and so we've enjoyed this place through its almost 50 years. It's remarkable in the way that it is a coming together of both public amenity and flourishing businesses. There's something like over 200 businesses on the mall and side streets. And we have probably been at our best when we know that the business and business activity and restaurant activity bring that vitality to the mall. And we've been at our best when we are able to balance that business activity with the public nature of this space. And it was a part of that conversation in the Downtown Mall Committee that through the years, the spaces had begun to become overly privatized. And so that means that they seem to belong more to the restaurants themselves than participating in the overall intended design and public realm of the downtown mall. And there was quite a bit of support for finding ways to peel that back and find a better balance between the individual business spaces and the public nature of the mall. And I think we've had a really excellent conversation on that in this committee. And we couldn't have had it without an incredible contributions from staff doing the homework and very specific research and knowing every last little stanchion and planter that is on the mall. So I don't know that we had been able to thank you publicly yet for that work, but I know that it's been an immense effort and really imperative to us doing our thing. So sorry for a little bit over-winded intro, but I thought that those were important things to add.
Absolutely. also, when I looked at this spreadsheet, one thing that kind of had fallen off from the previous versions was similar to what Rick said, is sort of a statement of significance. Because as we were going through these, we kind of came back to a few kind of critical qualities. So I drafted something really quickly. I don't know if y'all like me to read that.
So
We.
those are
we-
in the staff
We agreed on
report.
something.
Yeah, I tried to simplify what
didn't see
people
that.
would look at and say,
Okay.
what's it going to do to my space? So I tried to make
Gotcha.
this worksheet the things, the nuts and bolts, whereas then the guiding principles that you all developed, and then Kate and I thought it'd be helpful to say, all right, how do we crystallize this a little
Okay.
sharper? But they are in the staff report, and then the motion, I would welcome any help rearranging it, but I
Could you
tried to
read the-
capture the,
Just for the
Yeah.
benefit of us and the public, could you read what you put in the staff report, or is it overly lengthy?
no, that's fine, I'm more cognizant of your time than anything. But you all had discussed some guiding principles, establishing them, and then sort of using that as the filter for when you said, all right, let's talk about railings or furniture. You established sort of,
Right.
this is the lens through which we'll
Can
look
we
at things.
put those up here?
Um,
On the-
Or do you want me to just read this? 'Cause I think
No, I can, I just wanted to explain that,
It's here in our report. It's just in the
yeah,
staff report.
on page one.
Some of us
And-
didn't bring laptops.
What occurred next, I can access the, I have to go around to get.
I can read it.
Rick, yeah, do you
Oh,
mind?
I thought you wanted it up there. Well, let me just finish this sharing. And so what was also realized when we talked on October 1st was that we're talking about cafe spaces mostly on the mall, but also at the corner. So I broke out the guidelines to sort of make it clear, what was cafe spaces in general. And so the first principle is that, one, the downtown, I don't know why I wrote for mall, but the downtown mall is individually listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register and the National Register of Historic Places. The second, the corner is within the VLR National Register listed Rugby Road University Corner Historic District. So that's establishing that both are within districts. Certainly the mall is individually listed. The third, the brick paved mall and the sidewalks at the corner are city-owned and important public spaces. 3, leased cafe spaces are not permanent. That is, all elements, furniture, railing, planters, etc., should be portable and easily moved manually. Next bullet, within a cafe space, the furniture, elements, and materials should be compatible. The next principle, materials must be durable, high quality, preference for metal, no plastic. The other next was prioritize pedestrian experience such that the size and placement of railings, furniture, planters, plantings, and other elements should not create visual barriers. Next was for unleased cafe spaces or when leased but not used for prolonged periods, all elements, furniture, railings, planters, et cetera, should be removed from the public right-of-way. Then, specific to the mall, elements of the cafe spaces must respect the design intent of the mall. I added, parenthetically, the mall is Charlottesville's living room. Second, to maintain the sight lines on the mall by minimizing visual obstructions within cafe spaces. Third, the fountains should be accessible with clear space on all sides. And fourth, placement of cafe elements on the mall should avoid and not cause damage to the mall trees. So those were the principles as you all had them, and they would be incorporated into the text of the guideline edits.
Perfect. Thank you for reviewing those for us.
And I will say, we also internally had the discussion about grandfathered and non-conforming, and it got to where I said, I know there are legal terms for it, but we know what it means, and so in that context, we'll use it. But when this goes to council, I can sit down with the attorneys and say, how would you like me to refer to these? So I'll get that squared away.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. So I think, yes, we would like to invite any members of the public that would like to comment. Would y'all like to say anything?
Hello again, Genevieve Keller. I'm primarily speaking for myself at this moment. Like Jeff and Breck, I was a member of the downtown committee, downtown mall committee, and we were overwhelmingly in favor of retaining the cafes, even though they might be technically an intrusion into the Halpern design concept. We all felt that they add to the, not only to the economic vitality of the space in our city, but to the experience, and they've over time achieved significance in their own right. None of us could imagine the downtown mall without the cafes. That said, I'd kind of like to invoke an earlier era. I was a member of the original Downtown Board of Architectural Review, and I guess some of you might remember that, and others of you might not even know that there ever was one, because before that there was a Board of Architectural Review, and then when the city decided that it needed to review primarily the mall, but also buildings adjacent to it, felt that it would be more expeditious and better accepted if there was a singular board for that met in the mornings. It was very oriented towards businesses. So I was an original member of that. It occurred to me the other day, there are only 3 of us left alive, Mike Bednar and Doug Gilpin and I. But we were very capably led for the 2 terms that it stayed in existence by architect Jack Reinhardt, now deceased. But Jack had a deep history with the downtown mall and was a modernist, but also working somewhat in a postmodern vein. And he really had an affinity for what was happening on the mall. His family had owned warehouses on South Street. His family was also the developer of the National Bank building, the skyscraper. So he really had a sense of history of the mall and how to do infill, and was very protective of the spaces of the mall. And so Jack always, whenever something came to us, and those very first cafes came to us, and we had to figure out, what are we going to do with this? How are we going to have these chains and other barriers to conform to the ABC laws? But Jack always reminded us that it really needed to be a simple, elegant, modern space that was consistent with the Halpern design. And so we were always really trying to take things away rather than adding things. And so I would just say to you today, try to invoke the spirit of Jack Reinhardt and strip these back to their essence so that they're economically viable and that the food is what is showcased. If the owners want to decorate their tables, yes, but they really shouldn't be doing things to call it individual attention and competing with the overall unity of the mall as it was designed and expanded over the years. Because as Jeff has said, and Breck, and I think Jack will in his, James, sorry, knew your dad, in his statement of significance, what an important space this is. And I would say, defer to Breck when you need to, because he said some great things in the last meeting. It is a landscape, and I'm one of the people who developed the first guidance documents for the National Park Service on how to evaluate and nominate design landscapes to the National Register. And that's sort of also at the same time period as the mall was developed. So it's kind of all of one piece. And my final thing, which I was talking to Kate on the phone about, is I think that this will be much more acceptable to council if you can make references to the comp plan. And you're not just banning plastic flowers, but you're doing that because it's consistent with our sustainability philosophy in the city. It's compatible with climate action. All of those other goals of the city can be interpreted in why you have these rules for the downtown mall and the cafe spaces. So thanks for letting me stroll down memory lane.
Thank you very much. So do we want to wordsmith any more, or, I mean, if you...
Is there anybody comment online?
Oh, sorry, yeah. Remy, is anyone online? Thanks, Breck, good reminder.
I have some minor things.
Sure.
Yeah, I do too.
You're welcome.
Does anyone want to talk before me? I see no-
Are you going to go long?
No. All right. So, let me see, sorry, I thought I had this. The temporary decorations, are lights included as, not permanent, temporary for holidays and special events?
I'm sorry.
For temporary decorations, is that a time when someone could put up holiday lights? Is that included in that, or are they forbidden completely?
So lights are lights, and so that would then, we would say what's under lights.
Okay,
and-
so no holiday lights.
Are they, what's allowed by lights? So,
Only
we
cat-
said, if it meets, if they're overhead lights, they would meet the catenary light
Yeah.
policy.
So
Things on,
basically no little string lights that, like the Christmas tree type lights or whatever, if someone wanted to do that for.
someone to do that on tabletop, yeah,
On
that's
tabletop,
pretty much,
okay.
yeah, it's not, now, this is where I think I need to, because this staff report and all of this is also, I'm primarily prepping for how to present this to council, so there's a lot in the staff report. Kate and I played around, we're like, well, what if we did this? All right, well, if someone wanted to do that, they could request that from the BAR. So the intent of these guidelines, even as they were originally written, was to allow staff to work with the cafe operators and, what do you want to do? Yep, check, 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 do it. If someone wants to do something else, they can certainly request a BAR review. I looked at, and it goes to the discussion you all had, is, try to be, not go in and just pull the rug out from everybody, but you haven't done that. And we're really addressing some things that just, haven't been done neatly or cleanly, like, using electrical tape and duct tape to hold on to things. But if someone wants to do something that's not clear, they can ask the BAR. And I think also, if someone wants to, come in and say, well, did you mean this by that? And there's no way to write design guidelines that say specifically this, specifically not that. So the default is, if someone wants to debate what the meaning of, I don't know, Kate and I we talked about, do we call it a barrel? Do we call it a cask? Is it a whiskey barrel or a whiskey cask or a wine cask? And what does full mean? If it's full, does that mean there's stuff in it? And we laughed and then said, if someone wants to debate what that precision of something in this is, we take it to the BAR. So I just wanted to be clear about that, where, yes, there's clearly going to be some whatabouts. And if I'm not comfortable based on what I have in front of me, then I'll say, you are more than welcome to apply to the BAR for that.
So, but what you presented us, so I'm clear, they would have to come to the BAR if they wanted to put up holiday lights for a week or so. According to this.
According to this. And they
That
can
was my
put
question.
lights on the table, yes.
Sorry. If I remember the discussion correctly from a couple weeks ago, we talked about that, and I think the sentiment was that they would, if they wanted to do holiday decorations, it was more on the front of their business building rather than the cafe space.
Just want to make
So-
sure. It was
Well, I just
clear
want to
me.
clarify for the public that we're not saying no Christmas lights ever, like.
Festive seasonal adornments, yeah.
Seasonal, excuse me.
Let's see, you got a typo for shelves, so under service equipment, service furniture and equipment, over on dimensions, typo on shelves.
Selves.
Yep. It seems, to me, if the cabinet, because a cabinet to me means it's got closed sides, if it's under 3 feet, it seems like it could have doors, but just tossing that out there, it's not gonna fall on that sword. I don't know if anyone else thinks anything about that. Otherwise, don't use the word cabinet.
Well, the intent there was that the mall not become a place where people are storing things. tall closet. I think
get
that's
that.
at Hamilton's.
And that's clear on this.
Yeah, that's staying, but that, and I, someone asked me, well, where do we put our, glasses and silverware? And I'd say, well, I hope it's going inside and getting washed. So, it's got to go in and come back out anyway. So I think the intent was to allow some places where there are some, that have these cabinets, but to not be creating things that sort of have four walls and where people store things.
The way I'm reading this is you're gonna have a 3-foot tall cabinet that has 3 sides are closed and the front's open. And if that's what we're saying, that I'm good. I just wanna make sure that's what we're saying. It seems to me that you could put doors on that, wouldn't make any functional difference, but,
To me, the not having doors means stuff doesn't get stored there, but
Okay.
it's, but I,
It says shelves are open, no framed, no
you
solid
talking about the
sides or backs,
cabinets?
so.
Right.
well, I mean, but then it says cabinet, no doors.
the distinction?
Where does it say no doors?
Under design,
I'm looking, no permanent enclosed storage cabinets, right? Is that
go
what we're
left one
looking at?
box.
Sorry?
Go left one box.
Shelves are open.
Shelves are open, but cabinets are different from shelves. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Cabinets, no doors, enclosed storage. Okay.
Again, I'm not gonna fall on my sword for it, but it just seems like it's a funny thing to me. And the other thing was just, I don't, you've got some very specific dimensions for chairs and bar counters, and I think let's just set some maximums for the tables and be done with it.
What I was trying to get at there is, there are some general standards to chairs, heights, and just say, all right, well, we're at least, having, we're not gonna get lifeguard
Yeah.
stand chairs. But it's, again, we're gonna have to, we have to rely, there's gotta be some reasonableness to this. And I'm not gonna say, those are 15.5-inch high chairs, I don't allow them. But it's just to sort of, if someone comes in and says, well, I wanna use all these, 5-foot chairs that people have to climb up and get into, that's not a standard chair. We can eliminate the dimensions if you wish, that's
I mean,
fine. Just
It
trying
seemed a little
to,
fussy, but if it makes, again, these are things I'm just throwing out there as something that I saw it and thought, well, that's,
I do agree with you on cabinets, we don't want cabinets, don't allow cabinets. I guess I just always thought of something like a low thing versus the high, but.
right.
And if we just say no closed storage?
Right. I think that's what we had discussed.
Well, they can I read this, that they could wheel something out for use while they're open, while they're,
Well, that's what I'm a little confused about as well, is when I see this and it says, you have to, like, your cabinets can't have doors or whatever, but could you wheel out something during the day and wheel it back in that does have doors or not?
Yeah, a lot of people are doing that, and,
I was confused as to whether that was allowed or not.
But if you do, it can't be over 36 inches.
I wasn't thinking of those being an issue, but I guess, we can, this is where maybe some
Is it-
photographs are gonna have to assist some of this, for example. DSR.
Isn't the point that they simply not be permanent?
Yeah.
Why would we care about the doors or not if they're just going indoors every night?
Well, that's where I was saying, if they wanna roll it in, I'd rather it just be black and they roll it in and out, but,
Well, I guess what I'm kind of saying is it's a little, to me, it's unclear if that is okay or not.
well, you all decide, what.
I would get rid of no doors or closed storage and just say no permanent enclosed storage cabinets, and that takes care of the issue, right?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So if we just remove the line, cabinets, no doors, or enclosed storage?
Yeah.
Yeah. Be all right with that.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
There may not be any reason to have a descriptor under design.
I understand, just tell me which sentence
I
you
think I would
just struck.
strike the words cabinets, no doors or closed storage. That's what I'm hearing.
And then the note obviously
The-
applies
then-
to that, but then no permanent enclosed.
Right.
Sorry, I do this to, it's, because at some point, this is gonna come up, or it's like the zoning code, like, just trying to figure out what point.
Yeah, but the problem with the zoning code, you're right, I mean, zoning code is, that's the zoning administrator's, this is where.
Well, I mean,
I
just
think-
finding wording that seems
Yeah.
unclear to me is what I'm trying to pick at a little bit.
So,
to make sure that it is
what I've
clear.
heard is to eliminate the dimensions when you go up to the, just anything, referring to standard heights is fine. If there's, suggestion about dimensions.
I'm actually fine with the dimensions, because then you get what is standard, is there gonna be some,
My first question is, what if someone does a bar at 36 inches, which I think is what's out at Saddles?
Yeah.
And that
Well,
seems pretty far away from your standards.
Also, what's maximum table or counter height, 8 feet? I've never seen,
Yeah, we talked about,
There's length.
it was gonna be 6.
oh, the length. Oh,
Yeah.
could you, then you should say 8 feet in length.
It
I was
Does
thinking
say
height.
length.
It says maximum table or counter
Oh,
length.
counter length.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry, I'm
No,
getting tired.
No, you're right.
Okay,
because
good, length.
I said it like
Did we
five
say
different.
8 or 6 feet?
We said 8.
We
It
did,
ended up
okay.
at 8, yeah.
And if we're being particular, could we make sure there are no crossbars underneath the table so my knees don't hit them?
And that's, I mean, we are, hoping to, we can't, completely eliminate things, but we don't want panels that are there. And I just remember, I did have that question about the planter heights that's in red, so we don't miss that.
Thought it was about the width.
So can I talk about tablecloths now? I thought
Yes.
we had just agreed to get rid of tablecloths completely, and I thought we felt the same thing about seat cushions, but I feel a little bit less strident about that. But I don't think there's any restaurant on the downtown mall that has tablecloths. Fleury might have it, they're not on the mall. They
Right,
might be
no.
subject to cafe space, but they're under that COA anyway, so God knows. I don't know why we're legislating something. First of all, it was never enforced, because there are no tablecloths. And-
Yeah, the
and
comment.
I don't think there are many even plastic tablecloths, so I don't know why this is still in here. And I think, what Jenny said and what I think Breck has said, we would rather legislate the perimeters and maintain the view and the landscape down the mall, but what goes on tables, as long as it's taken up at night, is less of our concern, because each of them are gonna have different standards, different whatever etiquette, not etiquette, aesthetic, matching their food, matching their prices, whatever. So I don't even know why tablecloths are still in there. And seat cushions, maybe, most seat cushions that are outside are not gonna be cloth, they're actually gonna be a plastic material. So I just wanna know how that has stayed in there too.
Yeah, that was just the final comment that you all said is cloth is preferred, but in some ways, it's an irrelevant line in this whole thing, because, I'm not, it's just saying, yeah, if you do it, make it cloth, but that's not something I'm,
So why don't we just get rid of it?
Get rid of that entire row?
it's up to you all.
So I guess you're suggesting we change allow from yes to no.
I just say get rid of the whole thing.
No,
Why
get
are we
rid
even
of
About
mentioning-
regulate it.
Why are
No,
we
no,
not-
no tablecloths, no seat cushions.
There are no tablecloths
Get
anyway.
rid of
I'm
it.
just saying, currently the guidelines allow them
Mhm.
and that they're cloth. So
Right.
my question is, do we allow tablecloths, or are you suggesting we should not allow
No,
tablecloths?
we're saying you shouldn't
Legislate
rule on
that.
what type of tablecloth anybody uses.
I think the most important part is that they're removed at night,
And I don't think anybody,
Would leave them there.
but seat cushions, it might.
I don't-
they might.
Why do we care if they're removed at night?
They'll end up to be somebody's pillow.
Well,
Well,
they
that may
could-
be
Yeah,
true,
that's-
but
they would
in which
probably know
case,
better.
the owner would
They'll
have a
bring it
good
in.
reason to remove them, wouldn't they?
Then sure, let's
That-
pretend tablecloths and
Because we
seat
think
cushions
that the
don't
government
exist.
needs to tell us
And
what
we're
to
going
do.
to strike that entire line from existence.
Well, I'm not gonna strike it from the because I want the council to see that there was a provision and, you know, that there's nothing there now. But yes, they are allowed, but then there are no requirements associated with them.
Correct.
And the, having cloth as preferred in there is not me telling someone, you know, take this down, you're just violating the guidelines. It would be, if someone asked, I would say our preference is for cloth, but, you know, so, but right now, there would be nothing, if someone asked me, what can I do with seat cushions or tablecloths, I'd have to respond, whatever you want to do.
I think that's fine.
I think
I mean,
that's
I don't
fine.
know why it can't be deleted.
Well,
If you
because I
don't
want
legislate
council,
something, then just don't, just
well,
take it
because
out.
you're modifying, you're
Currently, it's existing
revising.
in the
Yeah,
guidelines.
that stays.
I know, I
Yeah.
know.
So we're trying to show council, here's the current guidelines.
But we're not really giving council like a red line version.
I mean, we're
kind
gonna
of are.
send them this chart.
You mean retain that the column on the left that shows the current existing?
Correct.
Well,
And then
yeah.
what I'm saying is
And then-
everything else should be blank. correct?
I'm still
Okay, good.
uncertain how to package it for them, but I will make it clear to them that the current guidelines address tablecloths and seat cushions, that's all.
Yeah, that's a good point. If it's in the current guidelines, we have to show what we're doing.
Right, right. I
So-
wasn't advocating that, obviously, so.
So I guess we do have to keep it in as a.
Or how about then,
category.
no preference on materials?
Crossed both out. I crossed out cloth as preferred and crossed out compatible
Okay,
with other elements.
That's good enough.
that's good enough.
Yeah. I have nothing else, though.
Has council or any council member had any input about any of this?
I haven't talked to any of them. I don't think this is on their radar.
We only started last month at our last
Well-
meeting and then had a work session, and that's it. So it's been,
We did have extensive conversations as part of the Downtown Mall Committee, and there were members of City Council on that committee.
Okay. And did they have any particular point of view?
There was great enthusiasm for peeling back the privatization of the public spaces on the mall.
Okay.
I would say.
They are aware of the, they are aware that the current spaces as laid out interfere with two of the fountains at least. They are aware that the reason some of the trees are injured on the mall is because of propane heaters, that people put them against the tree and now we have to cut a tree down. So they are aware of some circumstances or the sort of the bigger picture of the mall. They're gonna have to evaluate some things. But they are not, it's not on their radar to, you know, what kind of lights or what kind of chairs and tables. So, but it will be in a couple weeks.
And was this direction, it was not
You mean
coming?
to
f-
review this?
Yes.
Well, we're required to. And it's just been we got a whole lot more we're gonna be reviewing over the next year. So, but that's, part of your charge from council in the ordinance is to periodically review the design guidelines and recommend updates. And, working with my colleagues in zoning, it seemed we needed to tackle some things on the mall, so I elevated it to importance, and that's why it's here now. But no one on council said, Jeff, you all need to look at these.
Okay.
But we knew we had to.
I guess we need to answer your question on the planters.
Yeah, I just was thinking like, I was out there, I'm like, 30 inches that's a big planter. And I'm thinking in context of the size of them. But one of the key issues, one of the principles are that these things they can be moved. So if the city has to go in and fix a water pipe, we don't have to bring in a forklift to move things, that these are easily moved. So I thought that 30 inches is an awfully wide planter, and it's an awful lot of, becomes a heavy pot. So I just didn't know if you all maybe thought 24 was more appropriate, but
I mean, I think your use of the word manually is also important because it suggests it needs to be moved by one or maybe two people,
yeah.
but not with a forklift or a pallet jack.
And you said that you gave this out to the cafe, current cafe people?
We notified all the cafe owners, or the cafe operators, that this was going on. We gave the web page where all of this would be linked.
Yes.
And I invited them to attend, and I invited them to contact me if they had any questions.
And nobody contacted you?
Nothing.
Suggesting these are reasonable requirements, maybe.
I mean, I'm sure there'll be, internally, it's like, someone would say, what about this, what about that? I said, well, please tell me how, we're not changing the rails, not changing the furniture, and, not letting someone put artificial plants on the railing. Tell me how that's absolutely critical to the operation of a business. So, I think these are extremely reasonable. There are a couple questions that I do want to ask you all, but if you continue your discussion and
So, on the planters, I haven't gone, are there planters that are 30 inches in width and diameter currently there?
Yeah.
I don't know, so.
Yeah, there's
Probably
some
some that are
locations
bigger.
where they're using like horse watering troughs as planters.
Right, but those are out.
That's right.
So, but I'm wondering if there are any other than the troughs.
There definitely are. Some of them would not be allowable for other provisions in here, whether they're outside of the current space or they're too tall. I personally, I think I'm fine. I have my own opinion about planters generally on the mall, but if we're going to allow them, and they can be of that size, that I think 30 inches is fine. But
And will no planters be allowed outside of their,
they are currently not allowed outside of the
but
enclosure.
they are currently outside?
And in conflict with the zoning ordinance, not your ordinance, not your guidelines. Your guidelines aren't relevant there. I would ask, looking at the list of things that would not be continued, I did note the half-barrel planters and I came down on feed trough planters. What was the word you found? There was some technical term for animal trough that I didn't know about. But I would like to also add to this, not grandfathered, any large planters that do not meet the guidelines.
All right, so what I'm hearing is that planters should be a maximum of 30 inches in width or diameter,
Mm-hmm.
and that we're not going to grandfather anything in that's larger than that.
If you all, I'm okay with that, yeah.
That's fine.
And what about height?
The height is that
36.
36-inch height.
For the planter itself.
But that's not to the top of the plant.
So
No.
I noted that, because I get the plants in the next line,
Yeah.
and I also noted, because I saw in the mall, there are some planters that are up on little podiums and bases, and, it's
right.
the top of that planter where, so you can't come in and put a 36-inch planter on top of a table. And then you all pushed back, not everyone, but there was not consensus on, I had proposed that plant heights not be, I don't know, I think it was 4 foot, 4'6" above the mall floor, so as to not create a hedge. Where you came down on that was preferably, just simply preferably not taller than 5 feet, and that they cannot be, create the image of a hedge. And you referred to some of the taller plants that are not solid. I still think that's going to be a problem, but if it, at the very least, they're doing it inside their space and not, creeping 4 feet out into the mall with planters.
I mean, I think we can always fall back on our guiding principle of not creating visual barriers.
And if someone, again, says, well, I don't think it's a visual barrier, you all are the referee.
Correct.
Yeah. I think that, you know, we need to keep in mind these are still guidelines. They're not regulations or law per se. So everyone has the right to come to us. Florida City Council.
I'm just going to add something because I think it comes up in relative to the lighting as well. It's part of this is it's retaining the design integrity of the mall design, but part of it is also allowing the city to still have a voice in setting some of the aesthetic consistency along the mall. So, for instance, with planting, the city has planters that are way bigger than that, but they are part of a consistent design. There's the trees are incorporated in that, and the same goes for lighting. Now, you could argue that the city could do a better, more interesting holiday lighting approach, but that could be something that the city could design rather than having it being co-opted by multiple individual design efforts that end up making things a little chaotic.
Now, if it helps, again, the staff report was really my first draft of what was going to have to go to council. So I laid out in order, what the ordinance says about, Chapter 28 talks about the cafe spaces and sidewalks and what the rules by that ordinance. The Board of Architectural Review, because of at least cafe space within a ADC district, then the design elements of that space fall under your purview. And then we have the city's comprehensive plan, which in 3 of the goals specifically refers to the downtown mall. And in fact, I'll read from strategy 6.1. Study how downtown mall can be more welcoming and inclusive for people of all social, cultural, racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds, and take action on the findings. And they say, continue to support and maintain the downtown mall as not only the economic and cultural hub of the city, but as a historic central place that encourages diversity through activities, residences, goods, and services. So the comprehensive plan recognizes the importance of that public space. Then next, I went to the Secretary Standards for the treatment of historic properties, and specifically as it relates to rehabilitation or not changing or recreating a historic district, and some precise language in there about retaining and preserving landscape features that are important in defining the overall historic character of the setting. And then finally, I inserted some comments from the National Register nomination, I should say the National Register listing, and including the statement of integrity and the statement of significance about them all. And I understand that there are the commercial interests of these guidelines may or may not do, but your charge as the BAR is evaluating how this impacts this historic space. So, and I think what we've discussed here and your principles are anchored in the comprehensive plan, they're anchored in Secretary Standards, and they respect the significance of the downtown mall. So I think you've achieved that, but I'm going to have to also express that to council, I know. So I'm hoping one of you will be available to go with me. But if we just want to view this as what can we let the restaurants do, well, then recommend, turn this over and not recommend anything. But your charge is looking at this through the lens of this is a historic landscape that has been individually listed and recognized. So, sorry to sound so rigid there, but I think you've struck that balance.
Does council have a committee that they will refer this to?
Us.
You.
We're in.
Yes.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, it's your, per city code, chapter 34, section 5.1.5.c.1, the BAR will develop and recommend to city council for its approval design guidelines for the city's ADC districts. And the BAR must develop the guidelines after seeking input from business and property owners in the various districts. Guidelines developed by the BAR will become effective upon approval by city council and thereafter will have the status of interpretive regulations. So you're fulfilling you get a smiley face sticker for fulfilling that job. And I said, we've talked the business, the cafe folks, we circulated this. I can't make them offer comment, but we are certainly, and we're also going to contact them about when this goes on council's agenda, so.
And we've already decided it's unnecessary to, I guess there's other documentation that goes through their certificate of occupancy regarding where they're allowed to put their fencing and being more specific about how that is kind of controlled so that we don't get the bulges in the fences, so we don't get the territorial creep.
I had contemplated something in here that said, we could pull a string line but this is where we've had conversations internally about how, there's no mark on the sidewalk out there of where the corner starts. But what Kate and I are going to do is in preparing the individual document for each space is to show clearly, what the dimensions of that space. And now someone could lease the space but move their railing in 5 feet and put planters out there. So, and I would defer that to the zoning folks, although they view it as, this is your enclosure and things should occur within the enclosure. But I think what we're seeing right now is people putting things beyond the leased space. But no, we've talked about possibly geo-referencing. There's ways to do it, but
It'll be mapped.
yeah, our job isn't to say your cafe space, north 27 feet, 3 degrees, ours is to say what you put into that leased space, here are the guidelines for its design elements. The question I did have for you all is the Bijou and has its unique furniture, and I think it's Fitzroy has that composite material. I specifically cited them as those stay, and if they need to replace a chair, they can replace it in kind. Where things change on the mall is when, and we're already seeing it, someone sells the business or sells the property. And as I would apply this, it would be if someone bought Bijou and they're a new owner, and they said, oh, we're going to buy all the old furniture, I'd say, well, then you need to go in. I'm not going to, it's not an automatic green light. If they want to keep that furniture, it would have to come in. And I think actually the composite material at Fitzroy was also approved by COA. So, but it would be, so it's not like, oh, as long as that space is a cafe space used by someone, this furniture can be used forever. It's that when those changes occur and there's a new lease, a new agreement, then we're complying with the guidelines.
I think these guidelines get implemented when there's a new lease granted to a new lease whatever.
Right.
Who wants the lease? What's the right word?
But it doesn't mean that next year, when Bijou, we go back and say, are you guys doing the same thing? I go, no, this is the year you got to change to black metal. We're not,
No.
as long as it's Bijou, and continue to operate.
It's a new occupant.
Right.
Right. And the new occupant could come and say, we'd like to keep the old furniture, and we could decide.
That's right.
Right.
It comes to the BAR, right.
That's right. Because, otherwise, the furniture is city property and you're leasing that too. I think For me, it's that the cafes can enhance the experience of the downtown mall, but they should not detract from the setting of the downtown mall. Right?
We ready for a motion?
Would you like to make a
I'd
motion?
love to make a motion.
Any other questions? Okay.
Do you want to?
We were going to not grandfather oversized renters. Correct.
Okay, will you all help me remember that? I move to recommend City Council approve these proposed changes and updates to the Architectural Design Control District design guidelines regarding outdoor cafes, including the guidelines for catenary lights and the guiding principles for outdoor cafes. I further move to recommend that Council concur with the BAR's recommendations regarding grandfathered and/or non-conforming elements of existing cafes, with the following changes to the chart that we have been using today. One is that for on the tablecloths, seat cushions line, that we keep the line but remove the cloth as preferred as a material and remove the compatible with other elements of the cafe in the design column. On the planters section, we will keep them as a maximum size of 30 inches wide and 36 inches height. And we would like to make certain that that oversized planters are not grandfathered. Is that it?
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Gestinger. Do I hear a second?
Second.
I'm gonna give it to Roger. All right, I'm gonna call a vote, please.
Let me, can I get one quick
Sorry, any
clarification
discussion
before you vote? And the catenary lights, I can't find my copy of the. Thanks. So, not gonna change anything, I just wanna make sure, just in full disclosure here. So, there were some questions about the height of the poles at the last meeting. I simply changed that the poles are gonna be a sufficient height that at the low point,
Yep.
that 7 feet is maintained. We had originally used the word strings, light strings, and I know that string lights connotate the Christmas lights, so I tried to just say the light cable, so I think nothing's changed, but it's just sort of making clear what we're talking about. And then about the straightness of the poles, and so I mean, that had always been in there, but that they be maintained straight, and so some of them are out there bent and twisted, and so that's in there, but I didn't change anything significantly other than just removing that pole height reference. Okay.
All right.
Noted.
All right, so this was a motion made by Mr. Gestinger and a second by Mr. Burrow. I will call to the vote. Mr. Bailey?
Yes.
Ms. Lewis?
Aye.
Mr. Timmerman?
Yes.
Mr. Schwartz?
Yes.
Mr. Burrow?
Yes.
Mr. Gastinger?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
Yay.
Yay.
No, we updated part of our guidelines.
I know. It's,
So,
how many years has it been, Carl?
So, thank you all, and thank you for your patience. It's
Just the tip of the iceberg.
we do have to, I mean, understandably, but I am being asked by members of council, when are you all going to update the design guidelines? And I think primarily that's, something to do with how do they comport with the zoning. But we need to get on that.
So I mentioned at our last meeting, I think, that I had a conversation with one of the council members who thought that they would support funding, hiring a consultant to help us through that process. I know that you feel strongly that the larger we, Charlottesville, should have say in how the neighborhoods are defined and their characteristics. which I agree with, but I also think that that consultant could help us with that. I think we're a volunteer group, like, we did a really nice job with this cafe space, but it's gonna take years if it's left up to just this BAR, or its makeup. So I think we do need to pursue hiring a consultant to help with that.
We have funding. I have a chunk, but I also have to do the entrance corridor update and then each of the historic conservation districts. I don't disagree with you but I think we tried a couple different ways and didn't get there, and, they're no one's fault. It's just, that's the result. I just want to make sure, you hire a consultant and they just take what they just did for whatever, Austin, Texas, and just do, word search, replace Austin for Charlottesville, and and then suddenly we have a document we paid for, and it's like, oh my gosh, so, but.
Might get some really good stuccos in their sections.
Can Ms. Keller be recognized?
Yeah, sure,
please?
yes.
Oh.
I would just like to issue a word of caution, that if a consultant goes out through procurement, and you get a form-based code consultant instead of a cultural resource historic preservation consultant, you're dead in the water. And I would think that there would be a large sentiment towards doing that. So if you do get a consultant, you really need to specify that the primary consultant is a historic resource consultant.
Yes.
And that they meet the Secretary standards, and not just that they've worked in a historic district. Because over and over, I challenged the credentials of the team doing the zoning rewrite, because there were no historic resource professionals on that team. And I was told, well, this person has worked in a historic district, and this person has done redevelopment in historic districts, but there was no one who was advocating for the issues that you deal with every day. And that's why we have what we have, and that's why we didn't get those things resolved, any competing issues during that process. And I can just about assure you, if you get a form-based code consultant, it will be resolved on their side and not on historic resource side.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, that's a good point. I think we can, try to control that, at least in the initial RFP and RFQ process, if we will. We can have a request for qualifications before we even issue an RFP, I would think, or hope. That might be one way to.
Fraser Associates was the firm out of Stanton.
That's right.
Helped us 22 years ago, I believe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Are they still around?
I think they're still in good.
I'm not saying that they are.
Yeah,
They are.
and a number of other people. I used to crank these out, and then, they became pretty boilerplate, so I think that's where, Jeff is right. The ones for Charlottesville are going to require some tweaking, because we have a unique set of circumstances now.
I think James was also thinking that at least a consultant could do an overarching review of our new code versus our current guidelines, and just highlight the biggest areas of conflict, and that kind of, that work is hard for Jeff and Kate to do, and we're,
Well, in
it's
that
hard for us to
regard,
do.
Preservation Piedmont has done several reports that are like very specific
Right.
to this.
But
Yeah, we need someone to look at the what-ifs, and I agree,
You're
and,
going to need some help if you're going to completely redo them, because you will need expertise to do graphics and formatting
Right.
that-
And I,
and, dimensions and all of those kinds of things. But you probably want to be developing your own guiding principles, so that you get something that looks like what you think
Right.
you want to have at the end.
well, and I think the other kind of overarching sentiment is, personally anyways, I don't think we need to rewrite the guidelines. I think
Bless
we
you.
need to revise the guidelines, and that's all we're charged with, is
Right.
that we're required to revise them. And that could be as little as changing one word,
Right,
which
because you're
isn't
reviewing
what
them.
yeah.
Right,
Reviewing them to see what needs to be changed to meet current conditions.
right,
Or things that have been problematic and need to be clarified.
that's right.
And we would, at Preservation Piedmont, we would be happy to participate in a
We
working
would
session with you.
welcome it.
And we knew the reason we're showing up is because we know that you're in the process of revising design guidelines, and that they were cited so many times to us in the code rewrite, that we wanted to be, part of that process and try to help move along. As we
I've been toying with the idea of, a dream team would be hire former BAR members who are familiar with what, where we've had issues and not, and, get some input that way, but I'll think about that in November.
Well, you still-
Except for Mr.
But
Gastinger.
they may not know our new code either.
You still
Well,
have all of our notes from the
Yeah,
past.
and that's where, and I think I'd mentioned to you, I talked to Paul Josie about how can we model some of these heights relative to trees. So there's a lot of steps here, and I think some of that is because it's where I feel a need to illustrate to council what this ordinance will do in some places, just so they can see it, but it may not necessarily be my responsibility. That's where one of the questions lies, is it for me to say, hey, this is what it's gonna look like, what you have proposed? Or to say to the BAR, here's what's proposed, how do we address it in the guidelines?
Well, just to, because there seems to be all this fear about our trees in our downtown mall with the building heights. Again, the code says we can limit the height to within 2 stories of the prevailing height, and then we can also ask for a 25-foot step back. So I think we're downtown on the mall, I think we're good.
Well,
for
until
massing.
it's appealed or until it's revised, as is being explored.
And what do you mean until it's appealed, and say that again?
Well, you all can approve a COA that has the step back and
Yeah.
height, but someone can take it to council and say, I don't like what
But
the
they can
BAR
always
did.
do that.
Yeah, so you're assuming that council would, I mean, they want the trees just as badly
Well, I'm
as we
ju-
do.
I'm
But
just,
not if it was in the underlying zoning.
yeah, I'm just offering that the BAR's purview is not absolute in relative to
Yeah.
the height. And I don't think I feel like we need to illustrate that, but yes, there are people who are asking, why will you allow the BAR to limit what we can build in the mall?
Well, currently, council is letting us.
Yeah, good word.
Letting us stick our necks
Well,
out.
yeah.
Be the ones to.
They let us, everything we do, they're letting us do.
That's right.
And
They
don't,
won't let
and
us
don't
have pizza.
Oh, forget, we've got to get our picture taken.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But you
See?
have to adjourn
Thank you,
first.
Jenny. Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Guys, thanks for your
All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
My wife
All in
and son
favor?
flew out Monday.
Two.
Damn. Breaking my own record, 7:59.